right, welcome everyone. And I'll start the meeting with comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda. All right, seeing none. We do have a couple of amendments. First, I would highlight that David Young is out this evening, and Mr. Stewart will be standing in his stead. Appreciate that, John.
Thank you.
I would like to let the board know that I did get a text from our student representative, Nirali Desai, who is under the weather, and has asked that we possibly postpone some of the student representative report until our next meeting. And I did text her back on our behalf and thought that the board might start that conversation this evening, but we might limit our discussion and then put that on the next agenda if everyone is amenable to that.
Yep.
Okay. We also want to add an executive session at the end of our meeting this evening, if everyone on the board is amenable to that as well.
Yes.
All right, so we'll add a brief executive session. And any other amendments? All right, seeing none, we will move to the student representative report and announcements. And I don't know, John, if you can take the announcements.
Sure.
And then we'll.
Here's our announcements for the week. Nutritional Services will provide a harvest luncheon at each of our schools. All families are welcome. Reservation can be made by calling the main office at each school, and the luncheon will be held on the following dates: Chamberlain School on Monday, November 9th, Rick Marcotte Central on the 10th, which is Tuesday, Frederick Tuttle Middle School Wednesday, November 11th, Orchard School Thursday, November 12th, and finally at South Burlington High School Friday, November 13th. Second announcement is PACT is holding a taco night tomorrow, November 5th from 5:30 to 7 in the cafeteria 2 at the high school. All are welcome to come enjoy a free dinner and dessert along with a performance by the high school musical cast and crew. On November 11th, South Burlington High School will be hosting the City of South Burlington's Veterans Day Assembly beginning at 10:30 a.m. And also that day, Rick Marcotte Central School will have a Veterans Day Assembly November 11th at 9:30 a.m. And finally, the third annual Rebels Got Talent is taking place Friday, November 6th, this Friday at 7 p.m. in the high school auditorium. Tickets are $2 for students and $5 for adults. And all funds raised go to the South Burlington Academic Boosters.
Yeah, and I'm going to add one announcement as well. After everybody eats their tacos tomorrow at taco night, they should go across the street to City Hall Conference Room, where there's going to be a community meeting on education funding. We're going to have the chair of the House Committee on Education, David Sharp, will be speaking. The executive director of the Vermont Superintendents Association will be speaking, and a representative from the Agency of Education. We'll be talking about how education is funded, how the funding formula affects South Burlington, and different alternatives, their pros and cons for funding that the legislature may or may not take up in the coming session. So I hope people can certainly join us for that.
All right. We will move on to, unless there are any other announcements, maybe Mr. Burke, in Nirali's absence, are there any announcements relative to championships and so forth you'd like to share?
We had boys cross country came in as runners-up this year and qualified for New England, and that was on Saturday at Thetford. And then also on Saturday, as reported widely, the Rebel varsity field hockey team beat CBU in overtime for their, they've won numerous championships, but they hadn't won since 2012. So that was pretty exciting.
Great. Good. Before we move into the student voice conversation, I just want to acknowledge the press in the room, and although I know you're probably very excited about our discussions on Administrative reports, our one-on-one initiative and assessment data, and so forth. I do want to share that no action was taken in executive session, so if there is an expectation that anyone is waiting for that, I will share that information. All right, we'll move on to the student voice. I think I let the rest of the board know that we shared the Guide to Student Voice, which is a Vermont School Board Association pamphlet with our student representative, and at her request, we'll add that to the agenda for a couple meetings from now. But if I could just open it up to the board in terms of your own thoughts and ideas around looking at roles, responsibilities, and expectations of our student rep.
Well, let me begin. I, for one, would like to see student reps play a more active role in these meetings, and to bring more in than just a report of what we've been calling the announcements. I think it'd be very helpful if they could bring in a sort of a sense of the student body in terms of issues of importance, and also the general viewpoint about how things are going and whether there's a better way we could function and be sensitive to student needs and in ways in which we could further student what we've been calling student outcome or student achievement.
I agree with
Thank you,
Dan,
Dan,
and I would add to it that I think that even in our regular discussions on policy and really riveting things like budget, I think that there would be some value in having our students participate to a greater extent in those discussions, because really they don't participate at this point in time, and that's our fault. But I think we could benefit from their perspective and from their participation.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I know we have Nirali right now. Do we have 2 positions that we
yet.
offer? We only offer 1, right? It might be interesting to think about having one actively participating and one attending as like a transition, getting ready for the next year.
That's what we have had in the past, yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think I heard from Nirali that there's some discussion going on around the selection process and maybe firming that up before that individual comes on board, but there would be some overlap period of time.
Good, all right.
Any other comments or discussion on the student voice? I think from my perspective, I think there's a host of things that we could work with our student rep on better defining, and it's some clarity on sort of a non-voting role. It's also kind of expectations when a board takes action, when the board is looking for input from student voice, and representing a broad spectrum of opinions, for instance. And I think also maybe getting some representation at some of the conferences so the student rep can get some exposure either in Montpelier at hearings that involve education, as well as potentially the Vermont School Board Association meeting where there were some great presentations this past year. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to make that role a little bit more robust. And I think one of the thoughts that I had thought about, and I guess we'll wait for Raleigh's input, was the potential of 1 or 2 board reps working in a subcommittee approach with Nirali and potentially the incoming junior student as well, to really put some structure around not only the selection process but also the roles and responsibilities of the student rep. So those were my thoughts as I went through this packet.
So Mr. Burke, I've heard that this is being opened up to the entire junior class, is that correct?
The student council is, I think, taking action on that. I don't know if they did last night.
Okay.
Or
Monday night,
but
yeah.
they've been discussing how a student can become part of the school board, even without necessarily being an elected member of the junior class officers. So that was the previous on-ramp, was that you were a junior class officer. And And so there was some discussion, like started actually in September, and Julie and I had met about that with Dave about just maybe restructuring. I made some contacts with the governor's office in terms of how the state board of ed appoints students to their to the state board of ed, and they shared with me what their process was. And we may use a similar process, and it involves a little bit more of an application process. And so I haven't heard back from this student council in terms of their endorsing any kind of new process to become part of the school board, but I do know that they are fine with going outside of student council to recruit and I guess ultimately select the member of the school.
Good. And so that timing may have happened already?
The only thing that may have happened already is they may have endorsed a new model of
Okay.
going outside
Gotcha.
of the junior class. And there's somebody here who's son's a junior class officer, so she might know more than I do. But,
Okay.
I don't know.
but
All
that's helpful.
Exactly.
All right, unless there are any other comments, we will move on our agenda. So we will move to the city and school collaboration. Would you like me
Okay.
to take that, or are you going to take that, John?
Go ahead, it's starting, and I'll fill in on the solar project, have a lot more detail
Okay,
for
great,
us.
good. Yeah, David and I did meet this past, I think it was last week, with Kevin Dorn and Pat Nowak of the City Council and the City Manager, and we've kind of reinstituted our every other week meetings. We shared information about the relationship that the district has entered into with White and Burke with the city. And I'll just read the comment here off this sheet so I don't go off script from what David intended to announce. But the South Burlington School District has retained White and Burke Real Estate Investment Advisors to assist in the district's master planning and visioning. Their services will be critical to move the school district forward in a direction that maximizes education and value for students and their families, and to ensure that the school district assets are best utilized for aggregated benefit of the community. White and Burke will be evaluating financial feasibility, providing cost-benefit analyses, and assessing market viability on behalf of the district. White and Burke is a 25-year-old firm with experience doing asset management, commercial brokerage and development, establishing TIF districts, and creating public-private partnerships throughout Vermont. So that, we've entered in that agreement. We're in phase 1 of that agreement, and the board has committed to meet weekly as well with White and Burke in terms of progress as they move through this, this first phase. I don't know if any other board members want to comment. And I'm trying to think of any other, why don't you go ahead and do the solar
Okay.
project update?
The solar project has been the city, the city owns the landfill, and there's been a proposal to put a 500 kilowatt solar field, fill it there, with Encore redevelopment, primarily with the city of South Burlington and the school of South Burlington Schools as a partner with them, because we have enough power. We need the power, and it would save us on our power bill. The idea was to have this finalized by December 31st this year. But there were, in negotiating the financing with Solar City, that didn't come to fruition. But the city has been negotiating with Altus Power America, and now feel pretty confident that they're going to be a solid financier of the project. And so what that means for the school board and for the district is a draft of a contract is going to come our way, I think next Monday, November 9th. And then we can distribute it, analyze it, and go to our legal counsel to see, hey, does this make sense for the district, and advise us on that. Then the city, meaning Alana Blanchard or the city attorney, Mr. Barlow, would come here to the board on November 18th for a brief presentation. and then expecting board action on December 2nd. So we have a lot of work to do between now and then. But it's still, there are still federal tax credits available through December 31st, 2016 that make this project viable for a developer and for us. So that's the viewpoint.
John, do you know on the 18th, will we be advised as to what is different from the proposal that we've
Definitely,
seen?
definitely. The credit, how the credits work and the amount of credits and the estimates are all different than
Right.
18 months ago when we first started talking about this. Yes.
And the project with Solar City, my recollection is that was looking to generate about 15,000 a year in potential savings?
Yes, and I'm not sure what that number is now. I have
Okay.
a kind of a net kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour, but I don't know what
What it will translate. Okay.
Exponents up to, so yes.
Okay.
Is there any timing on when this would actually have to be functional for the tax credits to?
Yes, it's a year, it's basically December 31st of 16, so we're looking at 13 and a half months. Yeah,
Has to be up and
it's
up.
very tight now.
Yeah,
So
that's one of the risks.
it either works now or it doesn't work,
Yeah.
really.
Is there a possibility those would be extended for projects that were in the queue?
I don't know, we can ask that.
Okay. Among some of the other topics that David and I discussed with Kevin and Pat was the interest and need for South Burlington legislative breakfast, which we have tentatively scheduled for November 12th at 7:45 a.m. at City Hall. And the topics that were proposed for that agenda included legalization of marijuana, Act 46 with an emphasis on intra-district merger and debt service exclusion. I know the city attorney, Jim Barlow, did attend a conference that he had an opportunity to listen to some of his colleagues from the state of Colorado, and they had a lot of dialogue about the collateral impact of legalization of marijuana to cities. There may be some information for schools as well, but we felt like this was an important topic to kind of get some information and potentially weigh in on as a collective body with legislators before the session opens up.
What was the time with that? You said what time?
7:45 a.m.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's been, has that been publicized at all yet? Okay. Maybe Meg, if you can just make a note that calendars should be checked on that. I think the city was going to go out to legislators first, but it sounds like you haven't heard about it through that venue. Okay. We'll leave that as a target date then.
Fair enough.
Martin already mentioned the November 5th Act 46 funding discussion, which is also at City Hall from 7 to 9. And then there's also a November 9th meeting at 7 at Chamberlain School, and there'll be a discussion of the airport specific to the sound study that was recently completed, I believe. And I know I'll make mention here of the fact that one of the items that the board had discussed in the steering committee meeting was the new information that was being made available to us as we were considering our alternatives with school configuration, and this is an example of new information that will likely come through that study as well.
And what time did you say that was?
That is at 7 at Chamberlain on
PM.
November 9th. Yep.
Thank you.
All right. And then we're looking to set the next steering committee meeting as well. And one of the major discussion points would be this legalization of marijuana, and staff and Jim Marlowe specifically at the city are prepared and ready to share lessons learned in critical area of concern. So just a heads up that we're looking to set that next steering committee meeting, probably outside of the charter requirement for quarterly meetings. I can't recall what date we had specifically talked about, but it will probably be before the shared budget meeting, which is typically in January?
Yes.
Yeah. So it'll probably be between now and January. And that is it on city and school collaboration. Any other board comments or questions? Great. All right. Moving on to 8, did we basically discuss the superintendent's report at this point, John?
We did. The only thing I wanted to bring up is where is David Young? David is the Vermont commissioner, state compact commissioner for the Interstate Compact on Education Opportunities for Military Children. He was appointed by the governor to fill this role. And what it does is it helps children of military people in active duty and people in the Guard who have to move around and change schools, change districts. You know, you hear stories of military kids who have been to 6 schools, 7 schools, and David's role is to help the state of Vermont help these kids figure it out. So that's where he is right now, and he's there for 3 days. So
great. All right, we'll move on to master planning and visioning, and we're ahead of schedule. I think there was, do you have comments on this section?
Well,
John?
there was a request to have information up on the website and keep it current and up to date. So Stuart's, I'm going to ask Stuart just to go to the website and show people where it is, and that's what David asked us to do. Okay. Thank you. You need lights out somewhere?
No, I think people will be able to see.
Okay. So in the superintendent's recommendation on master planning and visioning, there, the superintendent's recommendation on 10.6 and the superintendent's recommendation on 9.16. If you click there at the bottom one, Stuart,
Is that the
third one
landing
down.
page that we're looking at?
Yes.
So this isn't anything new, but we're going to keep our documents there so you can find them and review them and check to see if we're consistent or what the new issues are. And David wanted me to make sure everybody knew where that was. So we had the superintendent's recommendation on September 16th, and then an update on October 2nd, I believe. And then finally, on 10/13, the memorandum that the city council proposed to us. So it's just to say, hey, here's where it is. We try to make it as easy as possible to find it, and obviously there'll be more there. So
I know, I don't want to put Martin or Julie on the spot, but I know you had a chance to participate in a working session with White and Burke and the project manager, Stephanie Hanley, I believe it is.
Yep.
Do you want to offer some general comments about kind of where things are headed?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. We talked actually quite a few things. It was a fairly interesting conversation. It was really pretty introductory. And I guess that there's a couple main themes that I would take out of this discussion and where I think we're going to be working with White and Burke. One is to ensure that there's flexibility as far as how central school property can be used, to keep options open, essentially. Because there are things coming down the pike, such as the land development regulations, the citywide map. I'm sure that that's probably not the technical term for it, the comprehensive plan and such. And we want to make sure that the district's property has as few of restrictions at this point as possible, because, at least in my view, and during this discussion, is, if we decide, and it's still, an if, we decide to sell the central school property, it's the community's property, and the community should have the opportunity to weigh in at the appropriate time for how it should be used. So we don't want a situation where already through this process, before there was a decision one way or another on the school property, we don't want to see that it's restricted or it's going to be used on only one manner and such. So the one theme in what White and Burke is looking at the LDRs to make sure that we retain flexibility for that property. So we're not foreclosing options before we really have gone to the community, if we get to the point of wanting to sell that. So that was one thing I took from it. The second is we talked a lot about, what are the options that we want to have evaluated. And there are the two options that the task force has put forward, and we're going to be looking, White and Burke is going to be helping us evaluate those further. But there was also the option of status quo that we really want. And we talked a lot about what does that mean, status quo? Does status quo mean, that we turn it all into 21st century learning, or does it mean what we have now and retaining what we have now as far as facilities, which means there will be costs and there will be maintenance and there will be things that need to be done in the schools. So, and we also talked about the a possibility of an additional option, which would be consolidating into existing elementary schools from 3 to 2 schools, and how that would look. So we have a more robust choices, that we have full analysis of those choices before we then go to the community to ask for the community input, be it by surveys or other ways. I mean, that's the main things I took from the meeting.
I think that they have their work cut out for them right now with just the LDR issue. There are a lot of issues within that they need answers to before we can move forward.
Right, yeah,
So-
that's the first step, really, is to understand that.
I know one of the expectations is that they would be generating a timeline as well. I am anticipating that at the weekly meetings with however many board members can be in attendance, that we'll start to see more of a calendar of when things need to happen.
Yeah, she was unable to do that at this point. They're still trying to figure it out. And the emphasis from her and from us, we agreed with this, is we are trying to get this done as fast as reasonably possible, but we don't want to in any manner sacrifice how well we're doing our due diligence for purposes of the clock or the calendar. So I think, and the one other thing, one more point about the flexibility is, we are trying to figure out how much we can get from the property and from Chamberlain, from Orchard. We're trying to figure out what those are valued at, how much revenue the city can get, or the school can get for that property, because that will tell us if we have enough, or might have enough, or how much more we need for a new elementary school. And that's where the flexibility comes in, because if the community wants to maximize the revenue from that property, then there are certain things we don't want to have pre-decided before we get to that point. But the community may decide that that's not what it wants. But anyway, that just gives you a little fuller idea of that discussion of why flexibility is important. So.
Any other board comments or questions? I think there was a question that's come up about has the board responded to the city's proposal? And at this juncture, the board has not made any decision to respond to the specific proposal or memorandum of offering or understanding that is on the table right now. And we're continuing to go through the due diligence process and working closely with White and Burke on evaluating those alternatives. Okay, I know there may be some.
This is a circular question, but do we have a timeline on when we'll have a timeline?
I don't know, except that, since we're going to be, they have a working group that meets on a weekly basis, and we're going to be meeting them as a board on a weekly basis. So I think we'll keep close tabs on that. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay. I know there may be some members from the audience that have questions. I'll open it up for a few minutes. Yes, Tim.
Hi, Tim Barrett. So the White and Burke Real Estate Investment Advisors, how are they being retained and how are they being paid? Are they being paid for the services?
Yeah, you want to, well, right now, there's a phase one. The agreement, as I understand it, can be terminated at any point in time. But the phase one is to get through these analyses that Martin discussed. And I think John's identified, it may be loosely translating, but has identified some offsets based on some early retirements and some funds within the budget that
That's right. It
we can
wasn't
fund the phase one.
originally in the budget, but we're identifying savings that can pay the contract.
Do you have a ballpark number about how much it's going to cost?
Well, the first phase would be around $50,000.
$50,000?
Yes.
And do you know what the other phases might cost?
We don't. Until, if needed, it's only limited to phase one. And everyone, it's understood by both sides that that's the deal.
Other questions or comments?
For Martin and Julie, Lisa Martinez, part of their meeting with White and Burke, did you discuss maybe community input that would be part of their analysis, or is that going to be maybe a separate tool?
That was not part of our initial discussion yesterday.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, they're going to go to the folks that they need to understand the financial issues. But it's pretty clear what we're trying to aim for is to have an informed community discussion. And we're trying to get the necessary information right now to have that. So it's a little premature. I mean, I know there's a big discussion going on right now, but before we officially want to go out and really, get the community input, we want to have our facts straight.
Abby?
Abby Crawford. I have a question about what you mentioned with the LDRs, and I know that's coming up next week. Is there something that came up in your discussions with White and Burke that raised red flags about potential future use of second school?
Not specifically. I mean, she did not. She said there was, and this is stuff that goes beyond, I think, us as a school board as far as understanding the ins and outs of LDRs. We have to figure out the education regulations, and that's enough right there. But she said there wasn't any one huge thing, one big thing, but there was a bunch of little things that add up. The one thing I can tell you, and I actually mentioned at a planning commission meeting, was a road that goes right through the middle of central school property, which could limit flexibility. I expressed that to the planning commission with respect to the comprehensive plan draft, and that probably goes to, I mean, I haven't looked at the LDRs, but it goes to the LDRs and the other things as well. So we did not get any more specific than that. We're trusting her expertise and judgment on that. The main thing is she's an expert. She understands what our needs are as far as the flexibility that we want to retain for the community. So.
Yes.
Hi, I had one is kind of a very respectful request that the community allowed to have some input into the modeling process, or at least be able to get into the guts of what the assumptions are and not just see the output of the modeling process. Having been a financial modeler and an investment banker in my past life, I know there's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes before the output comes, and it feels a little uncomfortable to just sort of accept the output as fact coming from that background. It would be nice to have some way for the community to be able to see the guts of the financial model or the assumptions and be able to kind of stress test those or understand them. The other one was just a question of is White and Burke at all involved in City Center or any of these other developments that are going on right now in South Burlington?
Not to my knowledge. Their role, my understanding is, and John, you may be able to elaborate,
Right.
is that they do not get involved in the development side. I think they have two sides to their business, and one is we're operating with their consulting side. But examples of some of the projects they've done is they've worked with the medical center, for instance, on the Tilly Drive area is one good example, several of their facilities, but they don't do the development side of it. They work with St. Albans with their TIF district, things like that, but they really look at some of their work on the development side is the private-public partnerships, but we've engaged them in the consulting role.
In the past, they've been involved heavily in healthy living and Trader Joe's and Pier 1, that area. But my express recollection is they have no interest in the development in the city center that's there. I'll double check it too. Sure, it's a good question.
Yeah, that's my understanding as
Yeah.
well.
And last, it was a very tiny clarifying question. You said the two recommendations from the task force. That means the two recommendations from the main body of the task force report. That does not mean the minority report. So it means the consolidation down to one elementary school, and it means the school school for the two schools, K to 2 and 3 to 5, are the options that you said that two from the task force report we analyzed, and then the status quo, and then moving from 3 schools down to 2 schools. So I just want to be clear on the 4 options.
Was it O?
It's O and Q.
Q and O, so O and Q. Okay, yeah. Okay, got it.
So, sorry. So, but when you said going down from 3 to 2 as a 4th option, is that flexible in terms of grade configuration, or is that the K2, 3, 5?
I can comment from my perspective, and what we have White and Burke doing is it's looking at building no elementary school, making 1 or 2 of our current elementary schools be able to accommodate if we were to close, one of the other, elementary schools, or building one large one that can accommodate all 3, or one that would essentially, be working in tandem with another. In my view, White and Burke is not the expert on school configuration of grades. I think that's a separate. We haven't really talked that much about, but I think that's a separate question, a separate issue than what we have White and Burke looking at, and that's not where their expertise is.
Thank you. I think that's great. I'm glad to hear that White and Burke is involved, and the discussion is on costs and facilities, not where the kids physically are.
Most of their initial input research has been on the task force report and the minority report, so they're well aware of that, just so you know. Sitting in Davis' chair is a little different than sitting over there. The other point to that is the more options we would give to them, the more expensive it would be, so we want to focus it in and keep those costs as low as we can. So that doesn't exclude anything, but just want to make that point.
Yeah, and for those of you in the audience that may not stay till we set the agenda for November 18th, I believe David has invited Frank Locker to attend that meeting. So that'll be some of the insight around the educational aspect of it that Martin refers to. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to administrative reports.
Okay, so there are 2. The first one being the one-to-one program, which I provided you, and it's not my intention tonight to give you a slideshow because this is the 5th year of the one-to-one initiative from when we originally started. And so, giving you the information, I've also talked to David about, in future, the question whether this should, by this time now, be in a monitoring report, because it's really a way we do business. I wanted to point out some of the highlights to you, and then if you have any questions, I think the key thing is that we're working in a mobile device type of atmosphere. When we first started, the elementary schools were still basically lab-based with big CPU units, and now we have moved to them having Chromebooks. Those don't go home. They're carts and labs, but we are at about 80 to 90 Chromebooks per elementary school, and the 6th graders have Chromebooks, 1 per student. This is the 2nd year of that. And so we've been able to expand thanks to leasing in a way that has kept the budget more or less the same. Some years, like this year's a little bit of up, next year it's a little bit of a down. We've had a good partnership with Dell, which has kept our, they have the best coverage, so that repairs have not cost us anything. They're in the cost of the computers. And we continue to really begin to look at great ways to work with kids. Mr. Burke has spoken about the equalizing as, the main thing that has really put every kid in the high school really on the same level, as they all have the same device and they are all equal when they sit in that classroom. I was just at a workshop the other day looking at, we're building, we mentioned this in here, that we are building what we're calling a backpack of more and more tools to use as there are more and more apps, and dividing them by ones that help collaboration, one that helps independent schoolwork, one that helps teacher-directed work. So to begin to categorize, what kind of applications are available, and training teachers to use them effectively with students. So if there are particular questions, I would take those, but that's kind of what I'm
In here it's reported that approximately 80% of the laptops got returned for repair. Is that some way we're mishandling them? What's going on there?
Well, some of that is you know, the thing is that kids have those machines for 4 years. So even, you know, some of the repairs are major repairs, but some of them are just to keep them so that when they get them, they're in really good shape. You know, one of the issues has been that the technology has improved a great deal. So last year's 4-year-old machines that the seniors had, that they had since 9th grade, they were like getting an old used car and really feeling like you were having an old used car. And so some of the question of care, you know, does have to do with how nice is the machine and do I feel like this is a decent machine to use. This is particularly true for the 7th graders last year who got those 4-year machines, and those are the first laptops they ever got. The last 2 years, and I don't think Mr. Burke has one of the new machines, he has last year, they're much lighter weight, they're much hardier machines, and we've seen less abuse of those machines. But when we say we send 80%, it's like we're also taking advantage of the fact we can, so that we don't have to clean them ourselves. So I hope that answers your question. We still have more damage than we would like, Dan. It's in the report.
It also seemed to parlay into delay and inavailability to some students early on.
Yeah, it was
things
very
I think
tight
that things, you know,
yeah,
sending them back for repair, okay, but if it impacts what you can deliver, then that's a bigger problem, I think.
Though,
not that repair is fun.
No, I'm telling you, I agree, and I think we're getting a better handle each year, but the other piece is, you know, we're used to having them on day 1 at the high school, and, you know, most kids have them by day 4 or 5, you know, so when we talk about delay, a little later than that, Mr. Burke.
You didn't quantify the delay.
It's not great.
I do have one question as well. On the opportunities for improvement, you highlight facilitating internet access at home, and I was wondering if you have any data on the number of our students that don't have access at home, and actually how do we go about, as a school district, solving that problem or facilitating that, is what it says here. So,
you know, we were just actually doing some work for the state on that. I can't give you the exact figure, but I know it's, for us, it's in the 5–6% range at the most, depending on the school. At the high school, middle school, it's actually not that high. We know the kids because those are ways also that we transfer other information, you know, not online, to their parents, you know, with written forms and so on. A few years ago, we worked because Comcast, you know, had a deal, you know, where for students of low income could get a very good rate for internet access. We always let people know that the cable providers are still willing to do that. So it's a pretty small group. We do have some kids use the library or other public access sites for, you know, because they don't have home availability. But it's a fairly small group.
The mother in me is going to come out here, and I'm sorry, but whether my kid's driving my brand new car or my 4-year-old car, I expect them to show the same amount of respect for the machine, and I would hope that we develop a culture that promotes respect for the machine no matter what.
Right. Well, and I can't speak, I'll let Mr. Burke, if he wants, speak to the high school, because, you know, I do this from the 10,000-foot level. I do know that the middle school, you know, has their 3-step process, and I think it's been pretty effective over time and for kids. And, you know, also kids are more used to having these machines than they were in the past, and I assume that that's true in the high school as well.
Yeah, I think they treat them a lot better than they treated their textbooks. There are many uses for their computers that extend beyond the academic realm also. So if their machine's not working, there's a lot of things that many of them have limited access to. I feel like overall they treat them you know, quite well. I think, you know, whatever the numbers on the repair, you know, that to me is, I mean, I'd like to see what all, you know, what we're giving Dell to do, to be honest, but a lot of those kind of repairs feel like changing your oil more than they are, you know, actually fixing something that's broken.
Right.
And I would also be willing to bet that many of those repairs are happening when the machines have been given back for the summer. So they all get a little bit of a recon over the the summer.
Right, that's when most of that, yes.
So it's not like 80% of the kids have been down to IT saying my laptop's broken.
Yeah.
You know, the IT, the whole complete care IT scenario is like amazing. You know, that kids really don't go, period, without, you know, having a machine in front of them. It's pretty, and you know what, you kind of stop in your tracks. I mean, when we had the power outage today, you know, I'm getting messages on my cell phone like, you know, hey, I can't, you know, because they're doing their homework, or, you know, like, I think the network went down, and, you know, our cloud-based stuff still worked. So, like, I think Neo is still working because that's in the cloud, but, like, the actual network, so email and stuff like that wasn't working, and there's some intersect between them. So, you know, not having a functioning computer is not a desirable scenario for the kids. So I think they take really good care of it.
So, Stuart, you started the talk by saying that we're in a mobile device environment now, which actually we're in like a 10-year-old technology environment of mobile devices. I think most kids probably wouldn't consider a laptop even a mobile device so much. So the question, I mean, besides Twitter and tweeting from Mr. Burke, I mean, are we looking with the new FT that we brought on an integration of, you know, like the next generation as far as how smartphones might be used by students to assist them in their academics and organization and such? Is that somewhere, are there people thinking about that for us?
Well, we are, but I want to say, Martin, that, you know, it's still that question of production. You know, for example, the Common Core does require keyboarding. So
right.
Having machines without keyboards and having the kind of writing that the SBAC requires, not to mention what we require of students in a non-keyboard environment, you know, is not the same. So last year when our first leases were up, we investigated, look, do tablets make more sense? At this point, the Chromebook laptop, I think, makes sense for what we do with curriculum and how we want to be with students. But 2 years from now, that could change significantly. So while I agree, you know, that all of, you know, I have both my laptop and I have my iPad and I have my phone, and depending where I am, I do different things for the production of school at this moment. We still think this is the best device for the district's money. It allows us to do the most kinds of things for kids to do, from video to you know, messaging. But it probably isn't what they use when they're going on Twitter as, you know, high school students.
So you, Patrick, you answered a question I had, which is we collect all these over the summer, and I assume that's when.
Well, not all of them. Students can apply.
Okay.
If they are involved in like a college class or summer school, or some students have applied internships, what have you. So they do, I think there's a way, there's a path for students to keep it over the summer.
Got it.
And, you know, it's not a highly utilized path, but definitely there are ways that.
I assume though that without disclosing anything proprietary, I assume that's a lot of an asset that we have in a concentrated location.
Yeah, no, we have a collection place. It's all alarmed. It's all, you know, set. We staff it daily as we ship those back and forth. And that is when we say the 80%. I mean, that's the majority is the summer work to get them back up to the kind of, you know, perfect condition we want them to be for students.
Without disclosing where that is and where it has been. We do have a bit of an issue because the computers are not all back in the first day of school, and we utilize certain classrooms. So there's a bit of a conflict with teachers coming in, their classroom is still being utilized for storage and distribution, which has to occur somewhere. And it's been 2 years at one school, 2 years at another. It's going back to a different school next year, and we'll figure that out. It's a little bit challenging for our IT folks. That's why I bring it up.
So Stuart, from a run rate standpoint, I don't know if the numbers on one of the pages, the 2016, can you speak to sort of an annual run rate? If we're replacing things every units every 4 years, is that an annual run rate, or is it a portion of that?
I'll speak to
Oh,
that a
sorry,
little bit
John.
more. That's okay.
That's my financial guy.
We
He keeps changing hats.
Are you looking at the 553, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, if you go to the first two lines, the teacher laptops at high school and middle school. This is a complete conversion of, we're done with desktops in the room, so teachers have these laptops, essentially no desktops in the rooms anymore. So this is a 1 year, you'll see this, and it'll go down quite a bit, 72 and 43. Next year, the middle school probably won't need any, and the high school needs some. Keep them for 4 years, and then they're gone. So I can get you the run rate on these things, because we'll project it out for the budget. So you'll see it then. But no, we don't have to, this is not the same every year. For the middle school, we only have to invest 2 years on these laptops, and there's 2 years we don't have any investment at all. At the high school, it's pretty much one class per year, and we're doing some catch up with tuition students and that kind of thing. So this is not typical. I think this was a little higher than usual. In fact, I'm 100% sure this was higher than usual. Next year will be a little less.
Yes, we're entering budgeting season. Maybe we could look at what the trend has been on equipment. I know you usually separate that out as a line item.
Yeah, it'll be clear. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And not to go back on a conversation, but it did occur to me when we're talking about master planning. I know some of the discussion around our IT needs has been our cable, I believe it is.
Right.
So just the sheer volume of usage we have, is that something that is in the stewardship plan now?
No, I mean, it's an operating expense because it's a lease that's shown in the IT budget, but no, it's not specifically in the stewardship plan, no.
Elizabeth, I didn't catch what you were asking about.
The cabling between the schools.
The cabling.
Fiber optic,
Gotcha.
our connection is not in the stewardship plan. It's kind of an ongoing operating expense, and so.
Is that an area that we will need capital investment at some point?
I would think so. Depends on where the school is, but we had investigated moving to the National Gardening Center. It's the city-owned building, moving central office there. And there was an expense of laying more cable that we'd have to have one of the companies do. So, of course, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That might be something just to share with Burke and White during a working session, is really to look at that potential expense going forward. And that's actually, I think you may be in dialogue with the city as well, as we are mutually developing budgets, that there may be an opportunity to collaborate if we both have IT needs on a going forward basis. Right.
Yes, they have a tenant in that same building, so and up there is towards the, Veterans Park, et cetera, sure.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the one-to-one initiative? All right, seeing nothing else, we'll move on to the assessment data.
That's a good question, because it's red light on my this makes me happy, so maybe it's set to do that.
Speaking of cables.
We have the handout. We can go over.
It's not a lack of power, right? Your computer's
No,
on?
my computer's working, and now I have a blue light, so I'm assuming in a second I'll have light. Yep, see the Dell sign's coming up, that's a good sign.
Okay.
I'll use that minute to refresh.
Okay, so my plan this evening, especially because this is a new report, a new assessment, to do a fairly larger than I might do in the future when we're just talking about results. Just so everybody really has an idea of what the SBAC is about. So, just a little history. The Governors Association came up with a Common Core standards in English Language Arts and Math. Many states adopted those standards. They're not national standards. That is, the federal government didn't say, these are the standards. The state said, okay, we either accept or reject these standards. Vermont was an early adopter of the Common Core, and there were 2 test consortiums that came into being to assess how well you were doing in the Common Core. One of those was the PARC assessment, and the other was the SBAC assessment. Vermont has been part of the SBAC assessment, which is a Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. One of the reasons Vermont chose that one is because we were on the executive board. We were given more voice there. The largest state that is involved is California in the SBAC assessment. And actually more states have stayed with the SBAC assessment than you've heard in the news about different kickbacks and people against the test. Actually, more of that has been about the PARC test than about SBAC for a number of reasons. I'm not going to go into the whole politics. It also includes within that assessment package, besides the summative, which is what I'm talking about tonight, there's an interim assessment package, there's a digital library of tools that teachers can use, and all those things are being rolled out bit by bit. So the Smarter Balance, you know, I don't know if the word is really harder, but it certainly is different because it's aligned with the Common Core standards. It has more rigorous cut points. It covers a broader range of skills because it's a computer-generated test, so they're able to do more items that come depending on what a student does. The other pieces, you know, often I would tell you, oh, this score went up 7% or down 7% with the kneecap, and that could be based on a 1 or 2 point raw point score because it was based on 80 points, as opposed to this is based on 1,000 points. And because of that, it's more precise, it gives a better range, and also because the computer, as students answer the questions, especially the more objective questions, because there are still performance tests that are scored by human beings. But on the type of items that it does, it generates an analytic, you know, that wasn't true in the old kneecap test. And besides covering those, I'm going to talk a little bit about it because the kneecap for all students 3 through 8 basically covered reading and math. And writing was only done in 4th and 8th grade, or 5th, 8th and 11th grade. Writing is included in the English language test now, as well as research skills, as well as speaking and listening, because it's a computer test, you actually listen to part of it. And also there's a performance task. And the performance task, the teacher actually teaches a lesson to all the kids at the same time, and then they take the test together, so that everybody got the same information and background, kind of leveling the playing field. If all the kids are in the room together, heard the same thing in a scripted lesson, do they perform more or less the same way? So that is some very big differences from the kneecap test.
Stuart, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
How does this adjust for how a student learns?
So it is a computer adaptive test, which means that as I answer questions, it can go up, they say 2 grade levels, down 2 grade levels. It isn't really grade levels, but in terms of complexity of questions. So if I'm answering all the questions right, they will be getting harder. And if I'm answering questions wrong, they might get easier. But they're still within that same type of question, right? It's still trying to ask me if it's a certain kind of math problem. It may be only 1 exponent instead of 2, but it's still a question where I have to solve an equation. Or it may be, is that the question?
Yeah, that's part of it, but the example you gave of a teacher conducting a class. Lesson? Yeah, I mean, that seems, maybe I'm being presumptuous, but is that auditory?
The teacher, the performance assessment is not computer adapted, because that's where a student is writing a long answer. That's part of what's scored by human beings on this test. I mean, there might be 2 or 3 questions, but not enough that they would be doing computer adaptive. The performance assessment is basically the teacher has a script for the particular lesson, and there was a different one for, I think 2 of the 3rd grades were the same at 2 of our schools and 1 different. They don't know until, you know, when we get the test opened. The teacher then teaches that lesson, and the lesson is the same to all the students in that grade level.
So the teacher would not modify their teaching style to be experiential or visual?
It's a scripted lesson so that everybody gets the same thing. So it's not a teaching scenario, it's an assessment scenario, right? If we were teaching, it might be different. Even though, you know, in other words, the goal is that everybody heard the same thing. How did they? There are accommodations within the test, so that the questions might be read to a student who had accommodations. There's a computer test, and I'll talk a little bit about the adaptations. So there are things that students get with this test that would help them answer, but the lesson would have been taught the same. But if any accommodations, if they normally get big print, they would get big print for a handout. You know, those things are, you know, part of a student's IEP would still always happen. So I just want to do a little bit of terminology. You know, it's always still that question of what's proficient. ELA, English Language Arts, FRL, free and reduced lunch, and claims are the key concepts that are actually assessed. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So there's the proficiency cuts. You know, it's the same thing as before. That is, a student test level is level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. 3 is proficient, 4 proficient with distinction, 2 nearly, and 1 below the standard. And so, obviously, you know, the goal is to have a higher score. You know, it's not thing, but it's also it's based on the school scale score. The state has been very clear that it's the scale scores more with this test because it's on a 1,000-point scale and not a 80-point scale. We really want to look at improvement on those scale scores. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the claims, because a student could have a 3 and still not be proficient in one part of the test. And now we know in a clear way that that's true, where before we'd say, oh, a kid's a 3, he must be fine, or she must be fine. But that might not be the case because there might be one particular weakness. The old test didn't tell us that as well. So just a question of what are these used for? You know, the state is using them for monitoring, quality control. Obviously, there's the whole federal No Child Left Behind. You know, these tests will be used the same way that NECAP was to determine whether a school is theoretically being successful. But it's important to know that both the House and the Senate have passed revisions of that bill. They did that this summer, and it still hasn't gone to conference committee. They're very different bills. The House bill was passed with every Republican voting for it and every Democrat voting against it. But the Senate bill was 89-13, so it's a much more bipartisan bill. And they're really not, I mean, they're different. There's a couple of key aspects, but there's a belief that if it does get to conference committee, that it could move along. Whether it will get to conference committee with a new chair of the House and this and that and the other thing, is not really clear. But at the moment, Vermont has a waiver. With the first SBAC results were not used for any kind of school adequate yearly progress, but in the future this test would be used for that. But the state also has a way that they're planning to assess based on the new quality education standards and where that is in this model. I can talk more about that at a later time. And then we look at it obviously in terms of school improvement. It is more precise than the NECAP. And, you know, we're looking at, obviously, all the questions of the very specific populations. I think for you, it's really important to understand the trends and adjust resources to address priorities based on trends as you see them. There are no trends yet because this is the first time this assessment's been used. But one of the things that this test allows to do is that every year, so especially for our third graders now, they'll be able to follow the trends of the class and the trends of the student, computer generated, easily, automatically, without us having to do other kinds of data manipulation to make that happen. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about specifically what we're going to do later, but this question of how to continue with promising practices, there's some really good things that we got out of this test. So there are claims. The tests are made of claims. There are 4 for English language arts. There are 3 for math. For English language arts, they're reading, listening, speaking, writing, and research and inquiry. Those are the components that kids are being assessed on. And of course, he hits the button too fast. Oh, okay. So here's the interesting piece of the test. So this is 7th grade ELA results. So obviously all our 7th graders go to Frederick Tuttle Middle School. This isn't on the class. This is all the 7th graders. So up here, this is the state of Vermont. And you could see that there's only 3 categories for the claims. So it took a while to understand this because we're used to 4. So for an individual score, when you get, your 4, 3, 2, or 1, but on the claims, there's only a 3 scale. And it says here, that kids are either, this blue line are the kids who are exceeding, the yellowish are the kids who are not, exceeding, that are not making the standard. And then there's this big gray bar, and what is that? And what it turns out is this is 1.5 standard deviation points above, and 1.5 or more standard deviation points below. So basically what the analytics of the state has said is the gray bar is kids you don't really need to worry about. I mean, we worry about all kids, and we'll talk about the individual piece, but as a program, these kids are more or less on target, some more than others, but some of the kids who got lower scores here still got 3s and 4s. So the piece is to look at this bar here and see where we're not doing well. And as you can see, actually in English language arts, only 9% of our kids are 1.5 below the standard deviation. And so at least on this particular class, and I didn't choose it just because it has the best scores, though they were good scores, we're doing pretty well, and then we can look at these. On most of ours, when we look at the district, the speaking and listening is the area that has the biggest yellow bar. And the reason is because it's not the kind of speaking and listening that we've traditionally done, right? Speaking and listening, eyes on me, I'm going to talk to you just like I'm talking to you now. This is like kids listening to a podcast or watching a video during the assessment. They can play it again, but they may or may not. We're not there to tell them to do that. And so actually, while it's not true about the 7th grade, though the gray bar is pretty big, this is the area in English language arts that we'll be talking about, because there are 2 questions there. One is, do we want our kids to be listening to more podcasts and so on? Is that a good way to do education? Because it will increase the test scores, but I think we also have to make a judgment call, what kind of speaking and listening do we want our kids to do? But if we did that, our literacy scores, which are some of the best in the state, would be, quote, even better. So that's programmatically how to look at it. The math claims are concepts and procedures, performance levels, so that's, like your more traditional math questions. Problem solving, modeling, and communicating reasoning for a performance level. And if we look at that same piece, we can see, and again, I use the 7th grade math scores, and that's 18% of our kids, not 9% of the kids, that really need concept and procedure work. And, in Vermont, and we as a district with kneecaps and whatever, we really went after problem solving. If you've been around since the early days of the testing, you know that problem solving was really terrible. and that kids couldn't solve problems. Well, we actually are making results and gains there. When we look at 11%, only 8% not being able to communicate reasoning. So it really is looking still at that concepts and procedures. And there are other classes where that yellow bar is bigger than the 7th grade. Again, I just chose that particular one just so that it would be consistent. But that's what we're really looking at programmatically, is to make sure we can strengthen our concepts and procedures without losing the problem solving and the communicating and reasoning. But then there are individual students. So we get the same report. And so I blocked out, this is normally where the kid's name would be. So this is Sarah Jones and Bobby Jones and Billy Jones and all the rest of the Jones family. They're all in here. I've taken out their names. So they have a scale score. And then you can see their achievement level. So I took everybody here as a 3. That means that they were proficient. And you can see that this kid who was proficient, who was a little higher scale score, though actually it's the same, these are both the same scale score here. They, for concepts and procedures, were 1.5 above the standard deviation, and then they were, either didn't make it or made it, but they were in the standard deviation, they're fine. But we have this kid who's proficient, and these are real scores, and this kid for communicative reasoning is 1.5 or more below the standard deviation. In the past, we would have said, oh, they're just proficient, life is good. But now we can look at this individual kid and say, wait a minute, what is it that they're not getting about communicative and reasoning? And those anomalies are one of the pieces we're looking at. There's the saying, there's a 9th grader in reading this year who got a good solid 3, but got one of those explanation points for reading, one of those neutral signs for writing, and then they had checks for research and for speaking and listening. So what does that mean for a kid who's a solid 3, but actually at least the test, one item, not one item, but one snapshot says the kid has trouble reading. As opposed to, this is, the 4s are above that, and as you go down, there are more of these signs, and those are kids that we've been working with. Are they EST? Do they have an IEP? Are there people who are aware? But I think it's those kids that in the past we said, oh, they're proficient. Life is good. This gives us actually a better snapshot that says, well, maybe part of life is good, but it's not all what we want it to be. So I'm going to talk about some general trends, and of course, this is a first snapshot trends. This is 1 year of data only, so over time, it could be a little bit different. So one thing is we know that we perform better in ELA than math. And we've had a lot more supports around literacy than math for a long time. This is our first year with math coaches in all the buildings. We believe that will make a difference over time. But we've had literacy people, reading teachers and literacy coaches in all our elementary schools for a long time. And it really has made a difference. We have very strong, I think, literacy programs. So this is the state for ELA. By grade level from 3rd to 11th grade, we're the blue line, and you can see that we're above the state. And some of it is significant, some of it not as significant. And again, it's a starting point, because we again can be looking now at the claims and what do we need to strengthen within our program. We're still also, above the state in math, but our proficiency levels are not as high as they are in English language arts. Yes?
I feel that we have the Vermont data. Is this data on a school-by-school basis public? I mean, can we see how we compare to other top-performing schools?
Yes, I'll tell you about that. And okay. I can't remember if I have any slides for this particular report. I do for the science report that you have, compared to other schools.
That's right.
But I get you. I actually have started to do some work too on some other SBAC schools by meeting other states.
Okay.
Because actually it was very interesting because I looked at Connecticut because I wanted to look at comparable districts by income, and there's the most wealthy district in the state of Vermont, which is not us, doesn't come close to the top 15 in Connecticut. Not even close. So this is our free and reduced lunch data And again, better than the states, but in certain grade levels. And this is by all of our schools. Some schools are actually, you know, we did it by school to be a little different. Some a little higher, some a little lower. But obviously, always a concern. You can see on a one-year trend only, this cohort in 7th grade, pretty good data for free and reduced lunch. But I'm not saying anything yet about what it means because we need to have more years to, you know, to really say.
Do you have any initial hypothesis on why in that like 5th year things are equalized and then we jump up again?
Well, again, it's a different cohort. I do think, you know, I don't want to speak to this, but remember, a number of our free and reduced lunch kids, especially at the lower grades, are also ELL students, where English, you know, and they haven't had as many years of experience. Some of these kids may also be English language learners, but if they've been in our school system, they've been here more years or been in school more years than their younger siblings. So some of that is that. We need to continue, we're working on that in terms of disaggregating the data. And this is the thing for math. You can see we're still above the state, but you know, we got work to do. We did look at the gender differences, and you know, again, you know, this is one of those things where you speculate some of it is developmental. You know, why do, you know, girls and boys do things in different ways? Actually, when we get to the 11th grade, there was no gender gap in either ELA or math. For the state, grade 11, there was no gender gap in math, but actually for the state, there was a 12-point difference for ELA between girls and boys, and girls were higher. So again, it's 1 year. I'm not going to claim that we have, you know, total equality by the time they get to 8th grade, 11th grade. But it'll be interesting to see how that trend progresses. And you can see this is your ELA proficiency, male and female. This is not the state data now, this is just our data. So you can see ELA, the girls I think were 1 percentage point higher, and it was the opposite.
Stuart, how do you evaluate data that basically says by 11th grade they're more equal, but they went down?
Went down from what?
What's your y-axis there?
Oh, okay. In terms of how many students are proficient.
Right.
Right. So, so that's the other question. So we're looking. I don't want to compare apples to oranges. I'm going to go back. So
I don't know how to interpret that.
No. So, you know, basically 70-some-odd% of our kids are proficient in ELA in 11th grade. First year data, harder tests, harder standards, harder piece. That's pretty decent compared to the state. There are a couple of schools that did better than us, not many.
But are those separate cohort groups in 7th and 8th grade then?
Right, this is the current 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 12th grade. They took this test last May. First year of the test, new standards, new test. So there's no trending yet except to itself, right?
Okay.
And this has always been the issue, again, with the math, and you can see here, and again, actually, I think we might have the highest, if not close to the highest math scores in the state. You know that high school math has been more homogeneously grouped than other maths, and we've been working about that. But the cohort that has gotten math course 1 and now math course 2, in other words, math taught specifically for the Common Core, which has in its statistics starting in 9th grade, which we didn't do for this group that's tested here, Elizabeth. It's not this coming May, but really we should see a big jump the May after, because that cohort will have had more Common Core instruction. Yes?
Are there any plans by the district as a whole within the elementary schools to bring a more homogeneous instruction level at the elementary level with regard to reading and regard to math? For instance, I know that some districts are differentiating coming out in the primary grades where students 30 minutes a day get math instruction at their level with peers at their similar level. You know, some gifted students might go with more kids at their level, and that student might, with special education might go with the students at their level, the students who are in the middle
So we're working on universal design for learning and really trying to build that whole piece, sometimes grouping, sometimes not, to be more flexible. That's why we have coach, because we're really trying to strengthen our tier 1 instruction before we start pulling kids into different directions, because we know that's an area that we need to work. And what I was really talking about is actually less homogeneous grouping at the math at the high school than we've had in the past, so that all kids have the math, because they really need to have that instruction. And so the math course 1 is actually, while there is some leveling within the course, all the kids get the same material. Some kids meet every other day, some kids meet every day, and some kids have some supplemental after the class, but the initial instruction is to cover the same material. As opposed to, we used to have, well, you're in 2-year algebra, you're not in algebra at all, you're in algebra 1, or you're in geometry. And we're really trying to move away from that, because the kids aren't prepared then in 11th grade to take that test.
Right.
Or any test, for that matter.
How about the kids in the elementary level? Are they, if you have a gifted kid, for example, at the elementary level, are they differentiated?
We always work and look at the individual cases. And again, like I said, what we're trying to strengthen is everybody's tier 1 instruction so that it's better for all kids. And let's see, what have I got here? All students, results by elementary school. These are the specific school results. So you basically have Rick Marcotte, 3rd grade. The blue line is ELA. The orange line is math. So you can look at the 3rd grades. So you can see, for example, that Orchard's 3rd grade in literacy, was higher. There are other areas where the same, and and we'll be looking at that. There's also some other factors. For example, there's not enough free and reduced lunch kids at Rick Marcotte Central School to even give us that data. So, and we know that Chamberlain has a larger free and reduced lunch population. So, when we're looking at schools, we also know there's school sizes, class sizes, a variety of things. But that's just the data by schools, just so that you can see it in your report. And this speaks to your question, Patrick. So this is where we live, so to speak, by elementary results. So that's a 3rd through 4th or 3rd through 5th grade data, depending on what kind of school it is. So for example, Underhill ID only has 3rd and 4th grade data in it, and some schools only have 5th grade taken out of their middle school for this. But I believe they're in the order, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th in the county, and then here's Central, and here's Chamberlain. So, you can see we're in the top quadrant, but we have work to do, and the other thing is some of those are very small cohorts. And in fact, there's one school on the science page that I gave you, which went from like 80% of the kids making it to like 80% of the kids being nearly proficient, because there's only like 8 kids in the cohort, and if 5 of them just missed the cut, it really makes a difference, as opposed to, so at Underhill Central School, 3rd to 4th grade, does not compare to the numbers that we have in 4th grade. And then here are the math results. And our 3 schools are pretty close together in math. And you can see that we have some work to do and compared to whatever it's worth in terms of the county. But I just want to have that data in front of you. Here's the middle school data. And there's Lawton, Shelburne, and then us, Westford. And really, us and Shelburne, I think it's a point. So we did fairly well at the middle school. And there's by math. We go down a little bit there, but again, some of these are not, large differences, but it is about how many you're proficient, which is just, again, one measure. And I, future, would probably do these by cut scores. What's the middle cut score? Could give us some better information. And then high schools, and I did it, the charts by English Language Arts. You can see that we're 3rd in English language arts, and about the same. We're actually probably, I think, 4th in math, because it looks like Essex High School was a little bit better. So we have areas where we're strong, areas where we need to improve. We're very aware of trying to figure out how to do that data. But again, this is just a first data point, so we really need to be careful. You know, it tells us that we're going in the right direction. We do know some practices that work. We are developing, like I said, professional development plans, especially around those claims, because I think that's where it's going to give us the most help, is looking what are the bar where we're below the standard deviation, especially when it's above, 7 or 8%. And also for the individual anomalies of kids that in the past we say, oh, they're proficient, or wait a minute, that proficient kid actually got a below the standard deviation reading, so maybe they're not as proficient as we think. And are we aware of that kid having a reading problem? So that's some data that has given us that tests haven't given in the past. Obviously, over time is the question of cohort data, which this test will allow us to do more than previous assessments. The state is very confident because of the range of scale, as opposed to being an 80-point scale where 40 was, what was the proficient cut before, that if we really use the scale scores over time, we will be able to see student growth in a way that is a much more realistic and accurate portrayal of whether a student is really growing. Because basically they say, if you stay with the same cut score all the time, then you are not growing. We should be seeing a rise every year from a student. But it also gives us the ability to look at a 1 who may have gone up actually 150 points in a way, but didn't make it to 2, where in the past, it was hard to measure that. So, and so, again, we're working, we've changed a lot, especially at the elementary level. We have a new math curriculum this year. We have a new reading curriculum this year. We've had uniformity of writing. We are really working hard so that the 5 elementary schools get learning opportunities that are the same for all students. And to really analyze this data, there's been a lot of started both middle school and high school work, as well as among the administrators. And I think that's the end of my report. Any other questions?
I had a couple. I'll open it up to the board. Maybe I can start. The board was copied on a note from Rebecca Holcomb this week, and I just had an opportunity to look at a communication that went out to parents and guardians regarding this specific test. So there already seems to be some dialogue going on kind of at the head of the agency of education, and then apparently out as recently as today to parents and guardians, that are putting some caveats around how standardized tests should be interpreted. So I guess some of my question is, how do we as a board reconcile some of those messages along with the fact that we're going to be coming into budget season pretty soon, and I don't know if there are incremental expenses associated with this type of standard tests, but I know personally I struggle every time we have a discussion about standardized tests, because it seems like the effort is, which I totally applaud, to provide data that drives action, yet at the same time there always seems to be a caveat around the credibility of the data that might be linked to cohort size or some other, you need trends to make it actionable, whatever it might be. So I'm looking at this information as a point in time, not really understanding, one, how we're going to let parents and students become informed in a meaningful way that doesn't limit opportunities, and also reconcile just standardized testing in a way that's meaningful to improving the education we deliver here.
So
that was a long question, sorry.
Well, no, I think those are really reasonable things to ask, Elizabeth, because I think it's a national question, and it's a specific question. Because when you're talking about a standardized assessment, it's one snapshot and really only tells one part of the story of what our kids do, right? Because you know, they're fairly academic focused, and it doesn't show whether your kid's a good citizen or other parts of the ends. It's part of our academic achievement of ends, and maybe a few other things, because it is about perseverance, right? If our kids do well on the test, we know they're persevering, and you know, if they don't do as well, they may not be. One of the things that the state, and I got that letter today too from Rebecca Holcomb, but I've heard her speak about the test as well, is this focus to move towards cut scores instead of just saying, oh, it's a 3 and everything's fine. And that really is a change of our kind of way that we've looked. We've looked at how do we move kids into the 3 or 4, as opposed to, we haven't had the kind of level of being able to say, oh, this particular kid is above or below the standard deviation, what should we do? Versus, you know, like, here's the mainstream of our children, and how do we move everybody up the scale? So I think that's a start. I also think it's important, so I have the science things that I'm going to talk about. We talk more about that cohort there because they only get the test in the 4th grade and the 8th grade and the 11th grade. But over time, with the NECAP, we were able to look at, here's the kids who were 3rd graders last year, 4th graders, and so on. So that will happen with the SBAC. Cohorts won't be as much. This time it is cohort because that's all we had. We don't know how those 3rd graders are going to do as 4th graders yet because they haven't, you know, they only have 1 year of experience. But again, both for students and for cohorts, it's going to be a lot easier to follow the trend data because it's built into the test analytic. And that wasn't true with NECAPs. We had to sit down and figure out how to look at that. Again, it's a little different with the science because they don't take it every year. So then it really is looking, well, what were they like when they were a cohort as 4th graders? Is this 8th grade data showing they all went down, or they all went up, or they all stayed the same? So it's a little different discussion. And this is still NECAP data. So
and so what will we be doing specifically to communicate with parents and guardians and students?
So the parents got a letter home. I can send you a copy of it. You know, some weeks ago, with also an indicator talking about both what the claims were and what the cut scores were. So parents got these, right? You got your, and I don't know if they had any questions, you know, and they were told to call the school if they did, but they got their individual results last week of September, first week of October. We sent ours out.
Can I ask if there's any parent feedback on those?
I'm happy to give feedback. I actually was pleasantly surprised with the letter I got from the state around the testing. I'm not a huge fan of standardized testing at all, but reading the documentation, I was like, oh, okay, that's good. And then looking at how schools compare, so with your presentation, Stuart, a couple big red flags jumped out at me. I wonder if there's been discussion about adding margins of error to those rates, because those would account for the variability in cohort size. And if you could see like a confidence interval around each of those, you know, proportion of success, you know, everybody above 3, I feel like all of them would be overlapping, and so you could easily say, we're no different from these people, and because I think that's, to me, the big message of 82 is no different from 81, and oftentimes with a cohort of 12, 90 is no different from 60, and you know, I would love to see some error in that.
So that's a very good point. So on the individual test, the error band appears to be much larger, even though it's smaller than NECAP, because it says 25 points, for example, for individual student score, but on a 1,000-point scale versus an 80-point scale, it's actually a smaller confidence band. For the state, it's at 1%. For our schools, it ranges between 3 to 6%. It's 3 to 6 points for the confidence band. So what I would have to do is look what Underhill's confidence band was, you know, to do a real comparison, because I know theirs is bigger because it's a smaller cohort.
But would it be bigger just for the score, like the average score, versus if you you know, 100 kids and 80 of them are proficient, your denominator is 100, you know, which is going to set your confidence band around a proportion, which is interesting to that graph. But to that point, looking here at these scores, I just want to make sure I'm interpreting this correctly, this grade 7 math results by claim, and I'm looking at that bottom one you mentioned, like those that were 1.5 standard deviations below the average.
Right.
So you would expect 7 or 8% of people to fall into that category.
Right.
So anybody who's great, like any time you're greater than 7 or 8%, that's when there's a problem. So does that mean 35% of kids in Vermont are falling below? So that's the problem because we want it to be 7%.
Right.
And so any time here, so these are, well, we're doing better in South Burlington compared to Vermont, we still have more than 7% in those categories, which is causing
Right,
an issue.
and like I said, so when we look particularly at math, and I can pull it up, it really is computation still, and you know, varied by school. That was 7th grade, which were, you know, pretty good scores.
Yeah.
But overall, the highest we go in problem solving below the standard deviation is about 12, 13%. So it's not like worrisome the same way in some, I think in the 6th grade, which was our lowest math score, statewide and for us, and the biggest shift in math from 5th to 6th grade in terms of what the Common Core asked, I think that was like 32% for our claims from us in South Burlington. So we are really looking at that. But our problem solving was still on the low end. So we know we've done that well. So we could talk more about that all night long. I'd love to do it with you, Abby. But I think you raise a good point that, you know, especially when we do comparisons with other schools, I'm not looking at their claims, so I don't know what that breaks down. You know, that's you know, but I am looking at their scale scores when I compare that, right? So there are two kinds of scoring on this test, as opposed to NECAP, which was one kind of scoring. So,
Any other board questions or comments?
so I don't want to go very long into this. I've given you this data on the NECAP, and if you have any questions on the 4th grade, the 8th grade, the 11th grade, and the free and reduced lunch over time, over 3 years for us, because this is the same test that we have been giving for a long time. One of the things that has changed, of course, is we're moving into a new science curriculum that isn't totally aligned with the NECAP science test. As of next year, in fact, we had an in-service day today in the 3rd grade during the time like they've aligned their entire curriculum for all the units that we have built for them for the new science generation, next generation science standards. So I don't know how that's going to actually play out in terms of test scores, but what I do know is that there's a lot of movement. Remember, this is that 80-point scale, and that sometimes this only indicates one change, you know, like 1 point on the raw score. That last year, you know, the average might have been 42, and this year the average is 43, but it translates to 4 or 5% up, or, you know, percent down. So, you know, I think, you know, it's only what it is. And but if we look at our schools over time, you know, and again, it's a different cohort this time, right? Because it's a 4th grade test. So these kids right now who are in 4th grade in 13, they're not even the kids yet who took it in 8th grade. So, but we do have that data of the kids who took it in 8th grade. You know, but you could look at the Chamberlain School, you know, while it's at 68, 72, 67, they went down. I mean, it's not enough to be concerning. That's the major point. And you can see our schools are actually, again, grouped together. That's the good news. You know, our schools are more or less in the same place based on at least this year's results. And, you know, and, you know, the data that, you know, and I'll answer your question about the other, but the data, you know, that we want to continue to look at is that question of free and reduced lunch. And you can see You know, the high school's been, at least this year to last year, about the same, 27%, compared to grade level in the state, 15 and 17%. That's the percentage of kids on free and reduced lunch who are 3s or 4s. At the middle school, we had that big 1 year. I mean, the year before, I think it was 26%. Last year was 3% of the kids on free and reduced lunch. I remember Diane asking me that question, is that real? And up to 21. You know, I can't speak to when you have a jump like that. You know, I know we've been doing consistent work on how to, you know, scaffold for those kids, but because it isn't the same group of kids who took the test last year, you know, I don't know what went on that day, you know, but those are those interesting pieces. Most everybody else, and again, so I don't want to jump up and down and say, well, it was 22% last year, 44%, we did a tremendous and wonderful thing. I mean, again, it's a group of kids at the moment taking a particular test. It looks like good data, but it's not over time enough for us to say we've got this licked. And this has always been an issue for the science test. If we took it every year, it would give us a little better trend data. And the other piece of it, I always want to say with this test, because it is only given every 4 years, our scope and sequence doesn't necessarily match what the test scope and sequence is. We made a decision years ago that we really believe that earth science should stay in 6th grade. Some people do earth science in the 8th grade, and there are a number of earth science questions, you know, on that test that kids had in 6th grade, even though they're doing the test in 8th grade. Well, we believe that our scope and sequence works in terms of really preparing kids for science. So, you know, again, with a standardized test or assessment, there's a limit to what it can tell.
So Stuart, we're pushing our agenda
Yeah,
here
so
a
I'm going
little
to just
bit.
be done. I just want to always point out for Mr. Burke there, because he's very proud, because we've had the top science scores in the state.
So I do have one question I'd like to ask, and that is, there's a lot of press about there being too much testing. Is there too much testing?
Yes.
How much too much?
I can show you what our juniors do in May.
Yeah, I think we heard that horror story back in.
We did hear that,
But, you
yes.
know, some of it's self-inflicted, just so you know. It's by choice to take AP, SAT, SAT2, ACT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What would be nice would be if these tests counted for college placement in Vermont, which they do in many other states, including California. The entire California state system accepts the SBAC for admission to California State Universities, from Cal Berkeley to Community College of Santa Clara, or whatever, right? If UVM and the Vermont State Colleges would do this, and VSAC could help, then a lot of kids wouldn't have to take it. Yeah. I met with VSAC 10 years ago about this, and Don Vickers, you know, was in favor of them doing it. That's just one suggestion.
But
Yes, kids take too many.
So I want to say a different thing. That is true about the 11th grade. Pat's 100% right.
Yeah, that's my next
But when
question.
they're talking about it nationally, I mean, I was just at a national conference. There are states where every 2 weeks kids get these kind of test assessments to make sure they're on track. And Vermont, and certainly our system, does not do that. When they're talking about too much testing, there also is this whole trend nationally that Vermont has really stepped out of. And every time I go to a national conference, I always come back saying, I'm so glad I work in Vermont. We're basically, whether you're in Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, you know, many places, there are weekly or bi-weekly assessments. My nephew's teaching in Texas that everybody takes. That's the test. And they do that and not perform it in well, theoretically, but those kids are getting too many tests.
Okay, and I have a comment to make. I don't need an answer to this one, it's just my own observation. I don't know what the right metaphor is, whether it's trying to drink from a fire hose or whether it's trying to find the forest from the trees, but there's so much data here that it'd be really helpful if there's some way to say, look, I got all this data, but here's what we're doing. Okay? Because it is very tedious to watch this, and how to interpret it is we're not, I don't think we're the experts in doing that, so I think.
Well,
we
like I
need-
said, I gave them a bigger report than I normally do because it's the
Yeah,
first
no,
time.
look, I appreciate that you got the
but
data.
Dan, I think you're right, and I think in the future what we'll look at is we'll tell you how we're using the claims to move action plans forward.
Is that when you get into policy and practices?
I think so, yes.
Tim, did you have a quick comment or question?
Yeah, so you had VCAPs in the past, so you only have one data point. The question is there anything new that you're learning from this one data point comparing school to school or school to school or counties in Vermont that you didn't already learn or know from the VCAPs just in general?
In terms of school to school, no. I think our own program and student, we're getting some deeper data than we had in the past.
But in the general percentages that you showed, you know, where you have the grades and the ELA versus math and the school versus school and the county versus county, is there anything that's new in that data that you didn't already know from the VCAP schools? It's just in general, looking at performances by schools versus each other, with or without FRL.
Well, I mean, we just use that as a reference point. We don't use that to build our programs, how they're doing in Underhill, unless we think there's a promising practice in Underhill we want to look at. You know, other than that, you know, there isn't, you know, that kind of piece. You know, the school comparison piece is more an information point. You know, it's really our own work and our own students that we really focus on for the most part.
But the school comparisons, are they virtually about the same VCAP versus this one data point?
Yes, I would say that that's.
So that's one point I wanted to make is that
yeah.
with this new type of testing, really school to school, you have basically the same kind of results because you're still measuring the kids basically the same kind of way in all these different schools and these grade levels. And so if you compare them, you're probably going to get about the same results.
Yeah.
That's the only point I was trying to make. I'm not making a judgment on it.
No.
Abby could do a study that would show that there were probably a couple of schools that did better on SBAC than they did on DCAP relative to their peer school reps.
Within our district?
No.
Gotcha.
You'd have to just have the
I'm not-
DCAP and SBAC right after each other, right?
No, well, see, that would be one of the shortcomings of the study. That would be in the appendix almost. And limitations of this study. To see if
Sorry,
it's
Tim.
correct. Yeah, right.
All right, my timekeeper is going to skewer me, so we're going to move on our agenda
That's
here.
why you want me. I was really hopeful.
I just want to point out the iguana because, no.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 11, executive limitations policy monitoring on 2.8 compensation and benefits, and this is warned for action. So I'm not sure we're ready to take action.
No, we've seen it over here.
No, I know, thank you. I know when we've seen it. This is the first time we've seen it this time.
Well, we may not be taking action.
I know what you mean.
Okay.
It was in our packet.
Are we going through this line by line?
We can. What's the board's pleasure?
Not to do that.
How many detailed policies do we have on this?
There's 5.
There's 5.
Yeah.
Do you have issues? I mean, I have a couple issues.
Well, good.
We do have some changes that were made.
Yeah.
If it's okay with the board, why don't I just go through each detail policy, and if it turns out we need to have a further discussion, we'll
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
move this on. So detail policy 1 is in reference to further, without limiting the scope of the foregoing, the superintendent shall not change the superintendent's own compensation and benefits. And David is reporting compliance on this. Any comments or observations? Detail policy 2 is the superintendent shall not promise or imply permanent or guaranteed employment. There are a couple of modifications on page 3. And I think with those modifications, David is reporting compliance. Okay, all right, detail policy 3. Superintendent shall not establish or change compensation and benefits that deviate materially from the geographical or professional market for the skills employed. And
yeah, I have an issue with this interpretation because what it says is that he will use geographical and market-driven data to negotiate and establish compensation, but he doesn't negotiate contracts.
well, he's saying it's limited to unrepresented employees.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine then, okay.
Any other comments on, okay, detail policy 4, superintendent shall not create obligations over a longer term than revenues can be safely projected, in no event longer than 1 year, and in all events subject to losses in revenue.
So what about the elevator project that goes on 2 years?
Well, that's not employment, compensation and benefits.
No, but we've talked about this before, and didn't we talk about this related to contractors too?
It's in asset protection, I believe.
Okay, so I'm
Yeah.
thinking of another.
Yeah, I don't, it's not in this one.
That's
Right.
fine.
And the board approved that anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, but, okay, okay.
So detail policy 5, superintendent shall not establish or change pension benefits so as to cause unpredictable or inequitable situations. It looks like there are a couple modifications in here. And he's reporting compliance on 5. And why don't I recommend with this, since David is not here, that maybe we hold this over for action to the next meeting, so we can just review it with him?
It's fine.
Is that okay with everybody? Okay. I'm sure you could handle that, John, but
Sure.
we'll give him an opportunity.
Okay.
All right, so we'll move that one, and we'll move on to setting the agenda for the November 18th meeting. So we'll put this one back on, if it's not on already, for action. I have to find it.
It's on there, number 10. So we're gonna do, so this won't take any time, but then we're gonna do 2.5 is a big one, right, John?
Right, well, there's only four detailed policies.
Okay.
There's a lot of.
There's just a lot of attachments.
Yeah.
And then 2.0, we're gonna, I can't remember, that's a short one, right? Global.
Global executive constraint, I think that's pretty short. So we kept this on, we've got it warned for action. Or should we make each of these action? Do we need action on?
2.5.
Will we need action on that?
If we get through it.
Yeah, I think if we don't put action on it, you can't get through it at night, but
We don't have action on any.
I think we should.
The guidance monitoring proficiency-based
There's no
recognition
action on
requirements,
that.
does this require action? That's just reported this system, we're going to begin to build to assess the proficiencies in the.
Maybe, John, if you could just circle back with David and be specific on which ones need action.
Okay.
I think we're okay on 2.8 for sure, but I'm not sure we'll get through 2.5.
Okay.
I think we've got to put student voice on here.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we'll put student voice back on. I think on the superintendent's report, I don't think we need the rebel name. Next steps.
Okay.
I think David was talking about having Frank Locker come on, and I think that could be under master planning and visioning.
Okay, under master planning, sure.
What did you just say about rebel name one? You're gonna
I'm sorry?
the rebel name item. What did you say about that?
I don't think we need it on this agenda, under the superintendent. Oh, I'm sorry, this is reference to the administration comments. Okay, we'll keep that on.
So, yeah, I just want to point out that.
I thought that was an old agenda item,
This is
sorry.
fine, but if we're starting at 5, and this agenda as it is goes to 10 without the adds that you just made.
Okay, well, why don't we see where we can cut something?
the same.
No,
I think you
there's
should do it all.
one other thing that could be on here is probably on the superintendent's report to have the solar information.
Right.
We can make that concise, we can even make it an attachment you read.
I'm happy to move the ends monitoring piece to the next agenda after. I mean, it's basically showing you the proficiency-based system we're building at the high school and the work we're doing at the middle and elementary, so.
How long do you think it'll take?
I don't know, I thought I was gonna be a lot shorter than I was tonight.
That's okay.
So why don't we'll move that one.
Move that.
Move that to the next agenda.
How about the long-term financial stewardship? Do we need?
I think you need the report. It has to do with bonding and budgetary items, and it's part of our budget schedule. Whether you want to discuss it then, we'll just have it there, and we could do that as, I would say, as an attachment.
Are we gonna get it ahead of time, like?
Well, normal, the Friday
time.
before, sure.
We don't,
Yeah.
so we don't get it, oh yeah, we do, we can get it electronically the Friday before.
Mhm.
Okay.
So we'll add student voice back in. If we can put the financial stewardship plan as report only at this stage then?
Oh, definitely, yes.
And we'll put Frank Locker under the master planning and visioning.
Okay.
And I would just, if you could pass on to David, just to manage the time frame, because we are starting, I think we have executive session at 5 or 5:30.
I think it starts at 5.
On the 18th?
I believe so, yeah.
Have we nailed that down,
Well,
if that's the day?
I think we need to have that discussion because I think we're all on a different page on that.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't want that to be on Wednesdays because I know for sure that I will too, because I have to be at the VSBA meeting. And I guess the other thing is, I mean, for our purposes of that meeting with White and Burke, and does
That's
John?
not this is not.
That's not the White and Burke
This
thing?
is for labor negotiations.
Actually, Elizabeth, White and Burke have that date as coming to us too, 11/18.
Yeah, at
So-
5.
Okay, so we'll have to reconcile. Why don't we, was that from Stephanie or?
Yes, I mean, it was communicated that the board meets on Wednesdays, and there would be a plan to extend the meeting for an hour, or to 5 o'clock.
Okay, and we already had a commitment to have a 5:30 start for other purposes.
Okay, so we don't have anything set up then.
Okay, so why don't we'll, if you could give David that feedback, I will also circle back with him and we'll manage this start. Is this a Wednesday you are not available?
Yeah, I'm not, for other reasons, not available that Wednesday. Next Wednesday is the VSBA meeting.
Okay. All right, so we've got 2 things to schedule then.
I think it'd be fine with White and Berkeley. They'll work their schedule around what you need.
Okay. All right, so are we clear on what the public session agenda includes? So we're adding student voice. We are keeping the rebel name Next Steps. We're adding a solar project report only here.
Right, under superintendent's review.
We're just putting Frank Locker under Agenda 8, Master Planning and Visioning, which can be that presentation. And then the long-term financial stewardship plan is a report only.
Right.
And we're taking off ends monitoring proficiency-based graduation requirements and asking that David evaluate if there's anything else under policy monitoring that can be moved.
Okay.
All right.
Future agenda items, we're getting lax in putting target dates for some of these things.
That's our next agenda item. So future agenda items. I'm looking at the current agenda. Where are we missing dates?
School foundation, we have no date. 2120.5, curriculum content, we have no date.
Well, it's part of the same monitoring report 2.10, that's on May 2016. You'll see that others say parentheses, so it's just missing, but it's still part of
But
that
this one
report.
says monitor report 2.10. Oh, it's on below. So
Yeah.
can one of them be deleted?
Well, I guess we haven't heard from the SB Schools Foundation other than what money is being paid still to pay off the bleachers and such. And I thought we did want to hear from them on what's going on, if anything, which is probably nothing.
I mean,
But-
we need to report on our like investments and stuff. We have quarterly investment committee meetings. We dispersed a lot of money to start new scholarships, fund other ones. But it's not anything
not.
that could be in the paper.
Yeah, just yeah. Unless there was some sort of other reason that we wanted to try to get the moribund foundation moving on something. Can we get them together to make a new elementary school, for instance? Can we,
Easiest way to go is single donors.
do you have anybody identified for us?
Yeah.
We'll name the school after that single donor. All right. Yeah, I don't know that we need to have this on here anymore, the SB Schools Foundation update.
Well, it's
as
going to
far as
be,
for-
it's going to be included in Monitoring Report 2.4. I just
But
don't
we
have the
just had
date on there.
2.4, didn't we? We just did 2.4, and
Oh, we didn't
so,
include
yeah,
it.
yeah, so we've,
Well, we included just the
The bleacher
money,
thing.
bleacher money, that's why.
Oh, that
it's the
was
only
it.
reference to it in anywhere.
So right now, it technically would either come off because we just reviewed it, or we would ask for some specific update, even if it's a written update. What's the board's pleasure?
I think a written update would be fine.
So why don't we just make a note of a specific written update to David?
Okay.
We don't have a date on the We All Belong program, and I think that may be changing to diversity, inclusion, and equity. So maybe we can work on a date on that.
Yes, okay.
And we don't have a date on the boosters regarding fundraising. Okay. All right, we'll move to the minutes of the October 21st meeting. Any comments or changes? All right, seeing none, those are accepted. The October 26th meeting, comments or changes? Seeing none, those are approved. And the October 29th meeting? All right, seeing no changes, those are approved. Any comments or questions on AP Order 16 and 17? All right, if you can just take a minute on your board self-evaluation and forward that to our clerk. That's my name. I'm not going to make
and
comments.
don't put them like in between what you've done before. I can't tell what it is.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Do you want to report out?
Most everything, except something Dan wrote, and I can't read what his writing is. And
Would you like me to read it?
yeah, Dan.
So I said that under the board's linkage with owners, that we need to make sure that a net or inactions are included. there's just too much data on some of these things to digest.
Right.
On that one. You probably can't read the others either.
No, I think I could read the other ones.
Okay.
The other comment is, Chair did a good job of soliciting the board inputs. The test data went over the allotted time, but there was also comment that the test data SBAC was an important and a good presentation as well, even though it went over the time. Yeah, that's it. Otherwise, everything's dandy.
Everything was here on time.
Everybody was here on time.
No, everything.
Everything was
We
here
always
on
get gigged
time.
on that. We didn't get gigged on that.
No.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn and to, I need your agenda really
Oh,
quick.
sure.
And go into executive session for purposes of discussing employment evaluation and discipline of a public officer or employee, where premature general public knowledge would clearly place the board at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned and moving into executive session.